Yeah. Ringo Starkey doesn't really work. Ringo Starr, fabulous.
When most people think of Ringo Starr, they picture the cheerful Beatle behind the drums, flashing peace signs, cracking jokes, and keeping the steady groove on songs like Come Together. He was the fun one, the lovable one, the Beatle who always seemed to get along with everyone. But behind that laid-back charm and signature peace and love vibe was a seasoned musician, someone with surprisingly strong opinions about his peers, especially other drummers. While Ringo kept things friendly in public, those close to him knew the truth. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, especially when the music didn't measure up. As Beatles producer George Martin once said in a rare interview, Ringo knows exactly what makes a good rhythm section. He just usually keeps those thoughts to himself. Well, not always. Today, we're diving into 6 legendary bands that reportedly rubbed Ringo the wrong way. From TV-made copycats to over-the-top drummers who loved stealing the spotlight. These are the groups that got on the bad side of the world's most famously chill Beatle, and why. Number 6, the Monkees. We start our list with a band that always seemed to follow in the Beatles' shadow, the Monkees. While some fans eventually gave them credit for their music, Ringo reportedly never took them seriously. According to Beatles roadie Mal Evans, Ringo's frustration started the moment the Monkees TV show aired in 1966. After watching one episode, Ringo supposedly said, "They've taken our mop tops, our jokes, and even our bloody musical style. At least they had the decency to get a proper drummer." That last line was a jab at Mickey Dolenz, who didn't actually play drums on the early records. Ringo wasn't just annoyed at the members themselves. It was the whole concept of the Monkees that rubbed him the wrong way. He could appreciate the musicians, but hated how the band was created to cash in on the Beatles' success. Things escalated when the Monkees started writing their own songs and playing their own instruments. Beatles assistant Neil Aspinall claimed that after hearing the 1967 album Headquarters, Ringo remarked, "Now they're trying to convince everyone they're a real band. It's like watching puppets claim they don't have strings." But the thing that really got to him? The media. As the Monkees gained popularity, reporters constantly compared them to the Beatles, especially during early 1967 when the Fab Four were in the studio crafting what would become Sgt. Pepper. According to insiders, after yet another reporter brought up the Monkees during a press event, Ringo allegedly told George Harrison, "Next journalist who asks me about those television musicians is getting my drumstick in their eye." For Ringo, it wasn't personal with the Monkees. It was about what they represented, a made-for-TV version of what the Beatles had worked years to become. That stung. Number 5, Led Zeppelin. Next up is a band you wouldn't expect to be on Ringo's bad side, Led Zeppelin. But behind the scenes, there was some quiet tension, especially when it came to their powerhouse drummer, John Bonham. While the world was raving about Bonham's thunderous, take-no-prisoners style, Ringo, ever the minimalist, apparently wasn't a fan. Their paths first crossed professionally in 1968, when Bonham and Jimmy Page were brought in as session musicians for a solo project Ringo was producing. Sound engineer Eddie Kramer recalled Ringo watching Bonham tear through a track, then grumbling, "This bloke doesn't know the difference between playing drums and attacking them. It's not a bloody war zone." As Zeppelin's fame skyrocketed, so did Ringo's quiet annoyance. Beatles associate Tony Bramwell said that after attending one of their early concerts, Ringo told him, "They've taken all the feeling out of rock and just cranked up the volume. It's like turning a beautiful painting into a sledgehammer." At the heart of it was a clash of values. Ringo believed in playing for the song, staying in the pocket, keeping it tasteful. Bonham, on the other hand, was all about spectacle. Producer Glenn Johns, who had worked with both drummers, remembered Ringo once saying, "Anyone can be loud. The real challenge is knowing when to stay quiet." Bonham hasn't figured that out yet. What bugged Ringo the most wasn't Bonham's talent. It was how the public suddenly treated bombastic drumming like it was the gold standard. After years of being called too simple, Ringo watched as Bonham was praised for doing the exact opposite of what he'd always stood for. Beatles biographer Mark Luizone even quoted Ringo allegedly saying, "I spent years getting criticized for not showing off. Then Bonham comes along, breaks his sticks over everything, and suddenly he's a genius. Maybe I should have just hit Paul with my sticks." It wasn't jealousy, it was frustration. Ringo wasn't interested in being flashy. He just didn't like that the definition of great drumming had shifted so far from what he believed music should be. Number 4, the Rolling Stones. The Beatles and the Rolling Stones were often painted as rivals by the media, but according to insiders, Ringo had his own quiet grudge, especially when it came to Charlie Watts. While John and Mick traded jabs in public, Ringo reportedly stewed over something more personal: how critics treated him versus how they treated Charlie. According to Beatles roadie Kevin Harrington, the tension began back in 1963, during some early shared shows. Ringo supposedly turned to George Harrison and said, "He's even more basic than I am, but they call him cool while I get called boring." It wasn't jealousy, it was frustration at what felt like a double standard. That feeling only grew when the Stones started recording at Abbey Road. Engineer Jeff Emmerich remembered Ringo inspecting Charlie's drum kit and muttering, "Barely a dent. He's not playing the drums. He's occasionally reminding us they're still there." Ringo, who had poured everything into developing his subtle but intentional style, couldn't understand how someone so minimal got praised for it. But it wasn't just about technique. Ringo also disliked the image gap between the two bands. While the Stones were branded the bad boys of rock, the Beatles were stuck with a clean-cut label, even though, as Ringo often pointed out, he did just as rough a start as anyone. Beatles press officer Derek Taylor once quoted him saying, "They call the Stones dangerous and us polite, but I came up through the Hamburg clubs same as the rest of the lads. Charlie looks like an accountant and gets called a rebel. I actually am one and get called cuddly." In Ringo's eyes, the Stones got away with doing less, but being celebrated more, for both their music and their attitude. And no matter how good a friend he might have been with Charlie, that contradiction always rubbed him the wrong way. Number 3, the Beach Boys. The rivalry between the Beatles and the Beach Boys is one of the most iconic in rock history, but Ringo's specific issues with them ran deeper than just musical competition. Unlike Lennon and McCartney, who respected Brian Wilson's songwriting, Ringo reportedly had a bone to pick with the band's rhythm section. According to Beatles insider Peter Brown, Ringo's irritation started when the Beach Boys' early surf hits began gaining popularity in the UK. Ringo allegedly told Beatles manager Brian Epstein, "Their drummer plays the same bloody pattern on every song. If I did that, you'd have sacked me by now." That wasn't just shade, it was pride. Ringo always saw himself as adaptable, someone who could shift his style to suit the song. To him, Dennis Wilson's drumming felt lazy and repetitive. Things got worse during the Beatles' first trip to America in 1964. Though not direct rivals, the two bands shared the spotlight at several events. Tour manager Bob Bonus claimed Ringo once confronted a Beach Boys crew member and said, "You've got two good singers and some fancy harmonies, but your rhythm section couldn't swing if you hung them from a ceiling." But maybe what irked Ringo most was learning that Dennis Wilson wasn't always the one drumming in the studio. Brian Wilson had famously used session musicians, the Wrecking Crew, for many tracks. That didn't sit well with Ringo. Beatles recording engineer Norman Smith remembered Ringo scoffing, "When someone critiques my drumming, at least they're actually critiquing me, not some hired gun filling in because I'm not good enough." To Ringo, the Beach Boys represented a kind of studio trickery he just couldn't respect. He wasn't upset that they were successful. He just didn't like that behind the glossy harmonies and critical praise, the foundation wasn't as real as it seemed. Number 2, The Who. If there's one drummer who represented everything Ringo didn't want to be, it was Keith Moon of The Who. The two moved in the same circles, shared the same stages, and even partied together. But when it came to music, Ringo reportedly couldn't stand Moon's approach. According to Beatles associate Tony Barrow, the frustration started early, after Ringo saw The Who perform at the Marquee Club in 1965. He allegedly turned to Neil Aspinall and said, "That drummer's not playing with the band. He's fighting against them. It's not music, it's a bloody circus act." To Ringo, drumming was about supporting the song, not trying to steal the spotlight. Things got even tenser in 1967, when The Who released their single I Can See for Miles around the same time the Beatles were recording Sgt. Pepper. Recording engineer Ken Scott recalled Ringo's reaction after hearing the track. Listen to Moon flailing away like he's fending off wasps. The song would be twice as good if he played half as much. What really got under Ringo's skin, though, was the praise Moon received. While Ringo was often overlooked for being simple, Moon was being hailed as a genius for playing in what Ringo considered an out-of-control style. Beatles biographer Hunter Davies quoted Ringo saying, "Keith plays like each limb has its own time signature. People call it brilliant. If I did that, they'd say I was messing up." There was also a personal edge to their rivalry. Both men were fixtures in London's wild social scene, which led to some awkward run-ins. Musician Klaus Voormann, who knew them both, recalled Ringo confiding after a party, "Moon's the same offstage as he is on, loud, manic, and desperate to be the center of attention. I've spent my life trying to make the song better. He spent his trying to make sure everyone noticed he was playing." To Ringo, Keith Moon was the ultimate example of what happens when ego gets in the way of the music, and that made him hard to respect, no matter how friendly they may have been off the clock. Number 1, Cream. At the top of the list sits Cream, the legendary power trio known for mind-blowing solos, complex musicianship, and, reportedly, for drawing Ringo Starr's deepest musical frustration. More than any other band, Cream symbolized everything Ringo couldn't stand about where rock music was heading: loud, ego-driven, and way too focused on individual showmanship. And no one bugged him more than their drummer, Ginger Baker. According to Beatles insider Neil Aspinall, it all started when Ringo went to an early Cream gig in 1966. He didn't even stay for the whole show. After walking out halfway through, he allegedly told Brian Epstein, "That's not a band. It's 3 soloists fighting for attention. The drummer thinks he's conducting an orchestra." For Ringo, that was the core problem. He believed musicians should serve the song, not themselves. Cream, in his eyes, was doing the opposite. Beatles sound engineer Jeff Emerick remembered Ringo's reaction after hearing "Sunshine of Your Love" for the first time. "Listen to Baker showing off while the song tries to break through. It's like watching someone solve equations when they should be telling a story." What pushed Ringo over the edge wasn't just Baker's flashy style. It was how the critics praised him for it. After years of being mocked for playing too simply, Ringo now watched the press celebrate a drummer who did the exact opposite. Beatles associate Tony Bramwell recalled Ringo's bitter joke during that period. "For years they called me the luckiest drummer in the world for keeping things simple. Now Baker flails around like he's got 4 arms, and suddenly that's the new standard? Maybe I should have flipped my kid over on every track and called it art." To Ringo, Cream wasn't just another band. They were the embodiment of a growing musical trend he couldn't stand, one that valued flash over feel and chaos over control, and that made them, in his eyes, the worst offenders of them all. So, the next time you picture Ringo flashing that peace sign and cracking a grin behind the drums, remember, he wasn't just a fun one. He was the quiet judge, too, a musician who knew exactly what made a great band tick and wasn't afraid to call out the ones that didn't. Whether it was copycat acts, over-the-top solos, or drummers who forgot it wasn't all about them, Ringo saw through the noise. And while he didn't always say it in public, behind closed doors, he had thoughts. Plenty of them. Which band on this list surprised you the most? Do you think Ringo was being fair, or just a little old school? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into the lesser-known side of the world's most easygoing Beatle, give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and tap the bell for more stories from rock's golden age. Until next time, peace and love. Unless, of course, you're in one of these bands.